I'm speaking today. I've been asked to speak about one particular church to give you a case study of St James Clerkenwell, which is a church in Islington in London. I'm hoping everybody can see me now. I can see David on the screen still. I can see my own face. So I hope everybody can see and hear. St James Clerkenwell is one of 24 churches in Islington Deanery, which happens to coincide with the local authority area of Islington Borough. And this deanery and borough were the beneficiaries of a very generous grant from Cloudsley, which is a trust. It's a charity which has actually now existed for more than 500 years. It was founded, believe it or not, in the same year that Martin Luther supposedly hammered his theses onto the church door in Wittenberg. And Catherine knows all about it because Catherine was actually involved in working for Cloudsley at that time on this project. And St James Clerkenwell, as I say, was one of the 24 involved. And I want to really split this talk into two halves. One is to talk about the solar panels and mention other projects that they did as a result of these grants in this programme. And then I want to talk about how they compared with each other and with wider standards through the benchmarking that we did then and also the energy footprinting tool that is happening now. So first of all, the projects themselves, they actually did four kinds of projects, both before and as a result of this programme. Solar panels is the headline title of the of this talk, but it's important to realise, as we know, that you shouldn't really be thinking about doing solar panels unless you are also or already have found ways of saving energy, both by reducing your consumption and by improving the efficiency of the fabric of the services. And Clerkenwell were able to demonstrate this. They also installed LED lighting in the church and in the crypt, which hadn't already happened. This was done in a couple of phases. They introduced draft proofing, and they introduced very interestingly loft insulation, a new insulation quilt in the roof void. This is an opportunity which isn't perhaps as widely recognised as it could be, because insulating church roofs and insulating the fabric of the church generally can be challenging. But if there is a roof void, then filling it with an insulating quilt is in many ways a no-brainer. So they did that too. And they also did heating works. They already had a fairly new boiler, which the auditors who were involved in this programme, they had estimated that at 90% efficiency. So they had a new boiler, which was by no means gas boiler, which was by no means due for replacement. But they introduced other efficiency improvements in the accessories of the heating system. But the most headline-grabbing project they did was their solar panels. Now, this was a challenge. Like Clerkenwell, I don't know how many people around the country will know Clerkenwell. It's not bang in the centre of tourist London, but it's a very atmospheric and characteristic area. It's a conservation area, and St James Clerkenwell is a very prominent landmark. It's a two-star listed building with a splendid spire, and it really defines the character of that immediate area. So putting solar panels on the roof of such a building was bound to be a challenge. And Catherine and I prepared the local authority for it gently by having a meeting at the beginning about the whole grants programme, and we specifically mentioned St James Clerkenwell as being one of the most challenging projects which was likely to emerge from it. They had to be very persistent in order to get planning permission. Getting a faculty was, by comparison, less difficult, but there were fabric issues as well, which I'm not sure have yet been fully resolved about the roofs of the gutters, at the same time as we were putting on solar panels. But it was a prerequisite in this case. It isn't always, but in this case it was a prerequisite that these panels should be invisible. And I have to say that I think the local authority was somewhat unreasonable about this, because we had a site demonstration which showed that the panels could not actually be seen, even though part of them sit behind the parapet. They all sit behind the parapet. Part of that parapet has an open balustrade. In theory, you might be able to see part of the panels through the open balustrade. In fact, you can't, as we demonstrated on a site visit. But the council, in spite of that site visit, which they were represented at, refused to accept that because it was theoretically possible to see the panels through those balustrades, even in practice you couldn't. They insisted that it should be shrunk so that there were only panels behind the solid parts of the balustrade. And this was disappointing. It did mean that the church had to reduce somewhat the size of their scheme, and they ended up with a modest scheme of solar panels. For those who know, who have an idea of the scale of solar panels, this was a 7.15 kilowatt peak capacity solar PV scheme, which is well worth it, well worth doing, but it took a long time to get there. But in the end, they did. So it does show how it's worth persevering, particularly with an iconic building, which can be an exemplar to others, so long as you are doing it in conjunction with other things and you have a wider justification, including public benefit. And part of that justification in terms of public benefit is when the church is very well used. And this church is extremely well used. It has very high occupancy, both for church events and for social events in the area, wedding parties and so on. COVID-19 apart, all of this happened before COVID, obviously, and the impact of that is bound to be considerable at the present time. But in the long run, this is a very heavily used church, and that adds to the social benefit of the improvements they make in the fabric of that building. And it brings me on to the second part of my talk, which is about how we benchmark this. All of the churches involved, the 24 churches, they all had the audits done by AECOM. Also all participated in our energy saving benchmarking scheme. And Clerkenwell actually came out top on the balance of the measures that we applied to it, both in terms of the intrinsic efficiency of the building before the alterations and improvements, and its efficiency relative to the occupancy, the person hours of people using the building. And on that, they came out A++ as outstanding. And they got a B for their overall efficiency, and they have a certificate to prove this. Now, some people may be aware that to a degree, the systems we've been running for some years now in the Diocese of London have informed the development of the new energy footprinting tool. And the algorithms used for the energy footprinting tool are to a considerable degree based on the algorithms that we use, both in diocese-wide data gathering with our annual returns, which we've been doing voluntarily for some years, and also in applying grades for energy efficiency, benchmarking grades, which the footprinting tool now does. So it's very interesting for me to be able to compare the results of the energy footprinting tool in terms of entries in 2019 with the entries we had for counselling programme, which was 3 years earlier in 2016. And they're not the same. The methodology is not identical. The one is influenced by the other, but they're not identical. So you would expect some differences. And one difference you would expect is that the national system was calibrated based on the pilots done in several dioceses around the country. First of all, Truro, and then 3 other dioceses undertook pilots which led to the final form of the energy footprinting tool. London was not one of the pilot dioceses because we wanted to have a sense of the picture nationwide. But this means that London is bound to perform badly because London's churches, we think, are actually using 3 times as much energy compared to their size as the average for churches around the country. On the other hand, they are very well used, very intensively used, so they're likely to perform well in relation to occupancy. And so it's going to be very interesting for us to compare and contrast and some of them do show lower grades in new energy footprint at all than they did in our previous benchmarking scheme. Clerkenwell is one that does, but others are still performing very well. There are still some A++ and A+ to be seen in those churches that have used the energy footprint tool. So I'm going to be doing an analysis which should be very informative for us, and I think perhaps more widely around the country, of how you can demonstrate a higher degree of efficiency, both relative to the captures of the building and the use of the building, because it is so important to keep our buildings in use for mission and still to use them as efficiently as they possibly can be in energy terms. That's the principle I want to conclude with. Thank you, David.